Hi, my name's Teri Kanefield, and I'm the moderator for this panel. Welcome. Our topic is totally true stories, nonfiction books that stick. And as you can see, our panel will be keeping everyone safe by following the protocols for social distancing. So we're all speaking from our own homes. And I will begin by introducing Tonya Bolden. Tonya Bolden is author, editor, and co-author of more than 40 books. She's a recipient of the Children's Book Guild of Washington, D.C.'s Nonfiction Award for her body of work. That includes Maricha, 19th Century American Girl, No Small Potatoes, The Hughes G. Groves and His Kingdom in Kansas, illustrated by John Tate, and Facing Frederick, The Life of Frederick Douglass, a monumental American man. Her latest nonfiction is Changing the Equation, 50-plus U.S. Black American women in STEM. And Tonya is a native New Yorker. Her work is fascinating.
Thank you. Here's the book.
There you go. Our second panelist is Nathan Hale. He's author and illustrator of the Eisner-nominated New York Times bestselling graphic novel series on American history, Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. He also created the sci-fi horror comics One Trick Pony and Apocalypse Taco. He's the illustrator of the graphic novel Rapunzel's Revenge and its sequel, Calamity Jack. He also illustrated Frankenstein, a monstrous parody, The Dinosaur's Night Before Christmas, and many others. I don't have to tell you that Nathan's work is a hoot. Nathan.
Thank you.
I'm Teri Kanefield. I've written a lot of books. I've won a number of prizes, including the Jane Addams Book Award. I'm also an appellate lawyer, and I've written a lot of appellate briefs. I can assure you that my appellate briefs are not as fun as Nathan's graphic novels. I've written novels, short stories, as well as nonfiction. I write for all audiences, middle grade appellate justices. I've written op-eds, legal and political commentary for NBC and CNN. And I live on the beautiful Central Coast of California. And Nathan's speaking to us from Utah, correct?
Yes. In fact, if you see my camera shake, I thought we were having an earthquake, but I've been told they are blowing up old ordnance at an Army surplus about 60 miles from me. I've had like 7 big shakes so far. So if you see my camera shake, it's Army ordnance being blown up in Utah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just started.
Interesting. All right. So
I'm in New York on pause.
In New York. Okay, there you go. So the first question, I think we'll start with Nathan. What was your inspiration for writing this latest book, and why did you want to write about this topic?
So my most recent book in the Hazardous Tales series is called Major Impossible, and it is the story of a Civil War veteran who explored the Grand Canyon. His name was John Wesley Powell. He wanted to be a geologist. He couldn't find any schools that would teach him the science education that he wanted. So he became an autodidact, and he just started reading about geology, all of these things. And when the Civil War broke out, he joined the Civil War on the Union side and was in the Battle of Shiloh and lost his arm. All the bones in his forearm were shattered from a Minié ball. After his arm was amputated, he continued in the Civil War. And then when the Civil War was over, said, okay, let's get back to what I like, which is geology and exploring. And he is one of the first people, well, his expedition was the first expedition to ever take boats through the Grand Canyon. And I thought it was a fascinating story. It had war, and it had the beautiful Grand Canyon. It has a person with an amazing injury still overcoming all of this stuff and going in there to do something that's hard for people with 2 arms in 2020 to do.
Wow, thank you. So Tonya, can you tell us about your inspiration for writing your book, this latest book, and why you wanted to write about this topic?
Actually, it not too long ago, I was working on a profile of the late NASA mathematician Katherine Johnson, right, of Hidden Figures fame. And as I explored, her contributions, and I just all of a sudden became really, really super curious about other Black women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I just wanted to know more. And then I started to think that our young people need to know more, because sadly, often when the subject is STEM, for most people, like the names and faces of Black women don't come to most people's minds. So I want to sort of change the equation. So that's what's behind it, is just wanting to, and I knew I wanted to cover from the 19th century to the present so that we honor the pioneers.
Okay, nice. Thank you. So my book is actually the 6th book in a 6-book series. And the idea for the series came about, I'd been trying to figure out, wait for it, how to give American constitutional history and constitutional interpretation for middle grade students. And I'd always wanted to do this because I think most people as adults wish they understood the Constitution better, especially now. Especially now. So I hit on this idea of overlapping biographies. So I selected the 6 figures that did the most to change our Constitution. When you change the Constitution, you change the way Americans live. So the 6 people who did the most to change the Constitution were overlapping biographies. My editor told me that they all have to stand alone, which is a bit of a challenge. So I had themes going through all 6. And the 6 that I chose, again, I looked at the people who did the most to change who we are as Americans. So I started with Alexander Hamilton, who gave us the Constitution. And I went to Andrew Jackson, who did a lot to make us who we are, particularly a lot of what's happening now. We can see the forces all the way through, back to Andrew Jackson. And one of the themes that ran through my book, or the series, is who's included in We the People. And so each of these figures did something to change that. So Hamilton, it was white, landowning, educated men. Andrew Jackson opened it up to all white men, which was a little bit of a populist, the pioneer, or the frontiersman. And then the third figure is Lincoln, who of course in theory gave us equality, racial equality, but we all know that that didn't actually happen. My 4th person was Susan B. Anthony, who ended up giving us the vote for women. My 5th person is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who taps into a different theme, which is the role of the federal government, which is a conflict all the way through our constitutional history. What's the role of the federal government? And then the last book is Thurgood Marshall, who not too many people know about, but he's the Supreme Court. He's a Supreme Court justice, the first African-American Supreme Court justice, but he was an activist lawyer who gave us Brown v. Board of Education, which desegregated the schools and changed America. So that's what my inspiration was. So for our second question, I'll throw this to Tonya. How do you maintain factual integrity while writing for middle graders?
Well, I mean, I think they're not mutually exclusive. I think that we don't want to fiddle with facts. But I do think, and I'm sure you guys know this, when it comes to history, very often there are gaps. There's information that you don't have that without it, you sort of can't tell the full story. So I think we are allowed to sometimes do something, maybe, perhaps. For example, in changing the equation, when the first entry is Rebecca Crumpler, who earned her medical degree in 1864. And I say flat out, we know very little about her other than that she was born in Delaware and raised mostly in Pennsylvania by an aunt. I just wanted that little tidbit because what's important about her childhood is that aunt in Pennsylvania was a self-trained healer. So I can't say that that's the reason Rebecca became a doctor, but I can let the kids make that connection. And then I think what you want to do, what we all do, is tell a good story. I mean, with the facts, we just make the facts come alive. We use techniques that poets use, that short story writers use, that novelists use. We build suspense. We use alliteration. Sometimes I did something in one book I won't go into, but a student said, you zigged and then you zagged. And I was like, right, yeah, I zigged and I zagged. So I think we're all about telling good stories, and we just use language, voice. And I find language and voice comes whenever, you've been deep into the research, that you find yourself like using the language, 19th century language. Like once I did a book on all girl bands. So I was reading old issues from the 1940s, during the war, of billboard and downbeat. And I was picking up all this 1940 slang. And then naturally flowed into my storytelling, because now I was used to saying chick and using all this swing, slang. So I think it's that in the research, we find the voice, we find the texture, we find, the color. I mean, it's like Toni Morrison, the late Toni Morrison once said, we only have the alphabet. We don't have paint. We don't have music. We have to use our words to make the color and make the music.
Well, thank you. That actually gives me a perfect lead-in to ask the question I've always wanted to ask a cartoonist and a graphic novelist, because he does have paint, actually. And so the question that I've always wanted to ask is, how do you break up a story into visual pieces?
This, I think, is the real key to cartooning, is breaking it down into chunks, into little pieces. Each panel in a cartoon is a little moment in time that can have narration or dialogue, but it's also confined to that panel. And then all of the panels are confined to that page. I'm working on the 10th book in the Hazardous Tales series right now, and I just finished that part where it's putting the chunk of information on each page. And some things are very important and need that space. Some things are very difficult to explain and need that space, or sometimes you just need the dramatic moment when they need that space. If you look at my books, they're all very, very tightly packed with information. There's all of these things that have to be crammed in there. And when you are drawing these things, you have to know what they look like in history too. It's not just the writing that needs research. You have to know what things look like. But I want to show you one panel in here where I thought the moment was interesting enough that it needed its own full panel. Sometimes you have to pack things in really, really tight, but every once in a while you just have to open up and give one panel. This is the moment of bailout, when some World War II bombers know they have to ditch the plane. See, over here, you've got all kinds of little panels, and then boom, this one page is just the sound of that parachute opening. So it's kind of an extra layer to all of this information, but I'm lucky because you can cram so much information into the pictures. And I think it's one of the reasons that the series has been popular, is because you see the history, you see the clothing, you see the vehicles, you see, and then of course you see the silly cartoony response to it all.
Really interesting, thank you. For me to answer the question, actually, I don't have that much to add to what Tonya said, other than when I've been writing biographies, and I spend a lot of time on the childhood. So what you notice when I read adult biographies is the childhood is usually perfunctory. Went to school here, was born here. You just find out some facts. But I spend probably more time on the childhood than the rest of the book put together. And I explore the childhood. And what I find is, if I understand what somebody was like as a child, if I understand the pressures on them, how they responded to things, how they reacted to things, how their environment shaped them, but also children shape their environment as well. And so I find that when I really understand the childhood, then later when I get to these important events, things start to make sense for me. Like, oh, that's why Lincoln did that. Or that's why Susan B. Anthony put her life on the line for equal rights. You know, what you see those seeds all the way back from childhood. So the only thing I would bring to the process question is for me a lot of time on the childhood. And I think also, since we write for young readers, somebody told me a long time ago that if young people understand what the person was like as a child, they can relate to the adult.
And also, there's the making them human. For example, in my book on Frederick Douglass, you can tell that maybe at times he could have spent more time with his family, or that when he made a mistake when he bought his first printing press, or when he took over the Freedmen's Savings Bank, when they offered him the presidency and he took it. And I don't put him down for that, but just to show he made mistakes. as great a man as he was human. Same thing you'll find in my book on Dr. King, is that these people were also human. They made mistakes. They didn't have everything right. One of the things I did with Frederick Douglass was stress that all his life he struggled with spelling. I was a voracious reader. Now, I don't know if he had an issue, but that's something to say he struggled. You might struggle with something, and great people, have problems, have issues, like other people. They're human.
Right. Interesting. Very, very good. I think we'll segue into a kind of a slightly different topic. Since we all write about historical figures and we all write about history, I think maybe throw this one back to Nathan. Why history?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do you write about history? And, I guess, why does history matter?
It's just so interesting and exciting. I didn't set out to be a nonfiction and history author. I came from picture books. I thought I would be doing goofy picture books about dinosaurs having picnics and stuff, But I just consistently find myself getting more interested in nonfiction and facts and the things that made the world what it is today, and finding those readers. I find a lot of parents will come up to me and say, our child doesn't read anything until they found your books. What's going on? We thought maybe they had some sort of learning disability. But a lot of the kids that like my books, they just don't like the made-up fantasy type of stories that their classes have been reading. When they hear these true stories about history, something in that really grabs their attention. And I think it's so much stranger than fiction that I'm fascinated by it. I did not study history I went to art school. I studied cartooning. So I hope that what I bring to my books is kind of the same wide-eyed excitement over history that a fifth grader has, because that's about my level of understanding. When I enter these, when I start my research, I get, that really happened? He did that? This is like that? I don't believe it. So to me, it's finding these stories and then telling them in as fun a way as possible. I honestly can't think of a better marriage than history and comics all put together. When you can see the history and see the action, and I think it's just so fascinating.
Interesting. So Tonya, why history?
Because when I was a kid, I hated history. I got textbook, cut and dried, black or white, no gray, no nuance, nothing to kindle curiosity. And then as a young woman, I had an opportunity to review works of nonfiction for a magazine. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating. It's vital. And then I saw that if you can tell a story with heart and soul, history is, as Nathan saying, can be just as fascinating as fiction. And so I got on a mission to make history come alive for young people, to sort of create the books that young Tonya didn't have. And, when you think about it, if you don't know what's going before you, you really can't make sense of your present era. For example, if you don't know, say, about the New Deal and the Great Society, you may not understand what some of the political fights or battles are about. And also, as Dr. King said, we are made by history. And as the writer James Baldwin said, history is literally present in all that we do. So like you say, now is the time for people to study the New Deal, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I agree with all of this, of course. And I think that history and the study of other countries broadens our sense of what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So you find yourself in a global pandemic, and you realize we don't know how to deal with this. We don't really even understand what we're dealing with. It's not quite like a bomb fell on Pearl Harbor and we all know we're supposed to mobilize. There's something that sort of crept up on us. And history can give us other times when this happened. We can look back, we can draw analogies. In terms of politics, it's the same thing, that there's a tendency to say nothing like this has ever happened before. Oh my God. And I spend a lot of time telling people, no, things like this have happened before. And when we look at how in the past we've dealt with similar situations, we see how much is possible. And I think sometimes despair or this, oh my God, like I'm totally overwhelmed. History gets us out of that, as does, as I said, looking at other countries. So my husband lived through the Pinochet dictatorship, and Chile got out of it. And he knows what it's like to be where there aren't free and fair elections. And so sometimes you hear some hyperbole out there. Like, yeah, we do have voter suppression. I'm not saying we don't. I'm not saying this is not a serious problem. But I'm saying that, people have gotten out of worse, non-violently. And I think Tonya will appreciate this. I actually had somebody not long ago say to me, have things ever been worse? Giggle. And I respond by saying, no African-American Black woman with a sense of her own history would ask that question. And so it's, so I think that history gets us out of a paralysis. It helps us understand, but it widens our sense of what's possible, that there's not just one way out. There's not one way forward. And I think sometimes we can have this sort of deterministic view of history. And I'll tell you, I had it. When I presented my book to my series of books, my idea was it keeps expanding. So first we had this, then we had Black men included, and then we had women included, and we had all, and I just was seeing history like this. It just keeps going up. Well, once I started looking at it, it doesn't. It goes up and down and up and down and back and forth. And the reason that our liberal heroes were heroes is because they were working against forces that haven't gone away. So I think it prevents us from seeing our time sort of in this sort of frightening way. It empowers us with possibilities.
Since my books are so much about horrible events, you can also look at history and go, yes, things do get better, but sometimes they get a lot worse. So there's a happy thought for you.
You can draw back on, you think about the Great Generation. I've been thinking about that generation who went through the Depression, who went through World War II, and saying, I'm thinking we're going to have, maybe we'll come out of this with another greatest generation. Maybe the people who are 9, 10, 12 now, who are going through this, may become the next greatest generation.
No, that's beautiful. Yeah. And it's true, when you look back at an era, my husband said, with people grabbing all the things off the shelf at the stores, my husband said, and again, he lived through the Pinochet dictatorship. And so he's got some perspective, and he just sort of smiled and said, nobody knows what it's like. That you sort of get a perspective and bring it all together. I think next thing I'd like to know from both of you about your books is, when a reader has read your book, what is it that you hope they take away from it? Want to start, Tonya?
Well, for one thing, that so much is possible. I mentioned Rebecca Crumpler, the first Black woman to earn a medical degree. She did that in 1864. Slavery hadn't even been abolished. Black people were not citizens until 1868, Teri? Black men didn't have the national vote to 1870, and it was decades before American women got that right too. So think about 1864, a Black woman became a doctor, a degree from a school in Boston. So that tells me that so much is possible. I mean, the other thing too, when I started saying we need to know more about Black women in STEM and all people in STEM, is that I hope changing the equation really inspires my readers to think about charting a course for a career in STEM. As a kid, I was sort of afraid of science. But there are so many possibilities. And right now, we are seeing how vital is the need for people in STEM to figure out how to get 2 people on a ventilator, to come up with vaccine. I mean, and we look at the global situation. And from now and in the coming years, we're going to need more people in STEM. And so I especially want our young people, and especially our girls, to think strongly about careers in STEM. Because it's the future. STEM just grow and grow and grow.
Nathan?
what I really want to take away, because I know there's so many different niches in nonfiction. There are the dry textbooks that kids are reading from. There are the books that give inspiration, like Tonya's. What I want is for kids to get the same fun and laughs and jokes from history stories that they do from a funny book, like Garfield or Wimpy Kid or something. I really am first and foremost just wanting to entertain them. I know that seems weird. I don't want to seem like an educator or an assignment. I want kids to just fall over laughing over a joke. But that joke happens to be something that really happened. That's my main takeaway. My main thrust when I sit down to write one of these books is to get the kids, to make them fans. I'm a fan of history. The facts and the things are creeping in, but if I have it on a tiered level, first off, I want them to have fun and laugh and get wrapped up in the drama and the excitement of the history. If they walk away with those facts now in the back of their head, that's a side benefit. My first benefit is that they are laughing and having fun. The facts kind of creep in on their own just because they're so interesting. But I am first and foremost there to make history pleasurable and fun, which is a weird and silly career to try.
Yeah, I'm
so
right
neat.
there. Right? Tanya, we're going to say something?
I was just saying, it's so needed. What he does is so
Thank you.
Right. So for my series, actually, we're still writing the ending. I realized when I got to the end of Thurgood Marshall that we actually don't know how his story turns out, because Thurgood Marshall made great progress. And one of the things that was kind of hard about writing this book is he lived long enough to see the backlash coming. So he lived long enough to see exactly what was coming back. And we are right now, I think, in a backlash from Brown v. Board of Education. And so he had a sad ending. He died sad because he saw what was coming. And so we're writing the history right now. And so I ended my book. I'm going to read my last couple of sentences for what I want people to take away, because I end with a few questions. So I ask, will the federal government continue to be a strong and unifying force in America, as Alexander Hamilton envisioned, or will state governments once again assert more power? This is particularly relevant right now with what's going on with the governors. And the next question, will America continue to move toward greater inclusiveness as the liberals envision? Or will America loop backwards and once more adopt the culture of a previous era? The answer to those questions will be decided by you. You hold the future in your hands.
beautiful.
So I think we have a minute or two left. Tonya, Nathan, anything else you want to tell people about your book or about your...
I'm curious about what people are working on next, and if you're able to work during this pandemic.
I'm having it tough. I'm working on a picture book of a musician. I won't say her name. I think before I came on air, I got an email. I think my editor has gotten back to me on my biography of Shirley Chisholm.
Oh, okay.
I find it difficult. I have moments where I'm focused, and then I just find it hard to sometimes focus. But I think we have to give ourselves time and be patient, because we're adapting and adjusting to things every hour, every day. So I think, it'll come back, and I just feel blessed that I'm able to earn my living doing something that will help inspire or educate our young people. I mean, I just feel blessed that, and I think I'm an essential worker, and I can work from home, so I'm grateful for that too.
Well, I'm actually writing a book on disinformation.
Oh.
So I get to do my research while I read the news.
Yeah.
Wow.
Reading the Senate reports that came out in the past few years. So that's what I'm doing, which is actually historical, because I look back at the history of disinformation, which has a long history. Bring right up to the present. So I think that wraps us up.
Okay.
What's Nate working on?
Oh, I'm working on book 10 in the Hazardous Tales, which is all about the Louisiana Purchase.
Oh.
Should be an interesting one.
will be an interesting one. Fascinating.
The Louisiana Purchase. Thank you, Tonya. I almost had a glip there. But so the purchase or the settling of Louisiana,
no, this is everything that kind of led up to it. So we get a lot of Napoleon. We get a lot of the original settling by the French of the Louisiana Purchase. We get a taste of the Haitian Revolution. All these things that poured into the deal that made it happen. Kind of a wacky one, all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the deal itself. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess that wraps us up. Is that?
Thank you. It's been good to see you.
Thank you. You guys, it was
You again.
wonderful to see all of you, and thank you.
Thank you. Be safe. Be good.